Today, we're going to talk about having equal access to assessments and what that looks like, and what publishers that I like, the one I work for, Pearson, what we're doing to make our assessments and materials accessible. As Judith mentioned in her earlier presentation, we have multiple teams working on this. I specifically work for the school division of Pearson. Oh, hang on one second. Sorry. And but we have multiple teams throughout Pearson that are working on making our products accessible, more accessible. So today we're going to talk about the issues that we've seen with high stakes testing, the barriers that we found, accessibility features that address those kinds of barriers, and how to get around the barriers and breaking those barriers, and the benefits for not just students with diagnoses and disabilities, but just everyone. So some issues that we've seen for standardized testing: it presents multiple barriers for multiple groups, including African American students, Latino students, and students with disabilities. High stakes testing can have negative consequences for students in general, especially for the student subgroup referring to students with disabilities. So we want to reduce that and make sure that they have the equal opportunity to reach higher education through these assessments, because if they're not accessible, we can't even give them like a foot in the door. So what kind of barriers have we found that are needing to be eliminated? What is causing students with disabilities to struggle with these type of assessments and struggle with getting access to being able to show how well they like the things that they do know and what they're able to do? So some barriers: we want to avoid requiring extensive typing. If it's, not a writing test, some kind of writing assignment, there doesn't need to be a lot of typing required. You want to make it as simple to demonstrate what they know by, selecting a choice, versus having to type out a lot of things using like spell check and all of that to correct yourself. Requiring complicated mouse navigation, you want to keep it simple. You don't want to have it probably more than 3 clicks away. Keeping it simple and repetitive kind of navigation. It shouldn't require 40 menu navigation. We want to keep it simple on these kind of assessments, and mostly just be moving from question to answer and then the next question. We don't want to require novel keyboard shortcuts. You want to provide known keyboard shortcuts like, copying and doing different text formatting, things like bolding. Those kinds of things need to be consistent, but you don't want to introduce new complicated keyboard shortcuts that they have to learn that require multiple keys. We want to make sure that we're not relying on sensory characteristics such as shape, size, visual location, orientation, or sound. What I see a lot of this example is like in a question, they ask you to evaluate the underlined portion. And that's like a sensory characteristic. There, you don't necessarily, not everyone can see that underlining. It's not easily available information to someone using a screen reader. It is possible to kind of find those things, but especially a student that's testing, probably isn't that advanced user of a screen reader. Same thing, underlining and bold. I've seen that with both those kinds of text formatting sensory characteristics. So what kind of accessibility features are we trying to build in to give students equal access? And a lot of it needs to be available to everyone. It's not necessarily like these things need to be on a IEP denotated like that. It's just like better design for everyone. So we want to include text-to-speech support. Having a simple interface, like if there is an extended portion where you have to do writing, there's no reason to not provide text-to-speech so that you can dictate answers, because it just benefits a lot of different groups. As far as like English language learners, and people with disabilities. As far as color's a really important one too. Making sure that we're using color in a way that it is not a barrier for people without color vision or low vision users. So just providing things in a good contrast. A lot of times we see, especially on assessments, they want to use a really light gray, and light gray on white is really hard to see. So just making sure that we're providing enough contrast. And then additionally, not having content depend on color alone. So like using red green to show if it's correct or not. We've seen that on like a review pages where you're reviewing your results on your exam. Making sure that you're giving that additional information, because it affects so many people with low vision, color vision, blindness. None of them are going to be able to understand that if you just use color to indicate that. Providing contrast setting options like within the assessment, and then also, as we were discussing, just being able to accept the user settings if they're using some kind of low vision software, as far as Zoom text, being able to allow those through into like the secure testing situations. There are problems with that sometimes, and we have to work together with the candidates for these exams to make sure that they're able to access it. But we do have entire teams that are excited to work with people with all kinds of technology. As far as like even eye gaze, we have proctors that work with candidates that want to take these kinds of exams and make sure that we can provide access. But back on color, sorry. Allowing those kind of settings, and then also just providing simple backgrounds. We don't want to have a lot of busy, because that can be very distracting and hard to keep consistent color contrast with the text. As far as text size, we want to make sure that everything can be resized. We're going to make sure that we don't lose content, and making sure that there's decent, like consistent spacing between each line and between each paragraph. For images, it's really important and tricky, as some of our earlier presentations discussed with Judith and Jeff, because sometimes for pedagogical reasons, we don't want to give away information in alt text, but it's also really important to be providing the information needed to answer the question. So if you're providing visual access to like numbers on a chart, it's important to be providing that. I do recommend mostly using data tables if possible, instead of trying to give a long text alternative explanation for a graph, just because it can be really hard to navigate and like break down that kind of data if you're trying to do like comparison or mathematical operations with it. I think it's a great idea to, say in the description for the image, see table for more information, and just give a brief description of whatever kind of complicated graph or data visualization you're looking at. I think using high quality images is really important. We see a lot in like science exams that you need to examine images to describe a science process. And it's really important that those stay clear and are able to be viewed easily without losing any of the content. We also talk about recommending tactile graphics as needed. Not everyone will have experience with reading tactile graphics, but especially if the student requests those, it's important that they're provided and accurate and well made. For alternative formats, it's really important to meet the student where they are and what their needs are. There's a lot of different ways that a student can access a test. So whether they're using a screen reader on a digital form, if they need it provided in Braille, if they need, hard copies that are Braille, we have a Braille division that works on making sure that we have accurate translations into Braille and all of that. If the student needs oral reading, that's an option. That is something that would likely need to be denotated on a IEP. It probably would not be available for all exams like an English exam, but other than that, a lot of times we just provide text to speech and it's available for exams that are not looking at reading proficiency. Providing information in Nemeth code or UB for mathematical exams. Depending on where the student is, there's not like a universal standard. They may have been studying Nemeth or they may have been studying UB. It's really important to give the student the exam in the Braille code that they have learned. We've heard from students that are, in college or post-grad that they were taught in one code and then tested in another, which is, it's significant enough that you can't just crisscross them. It's not a universal thing. So you want to make sure that you're surveying that ahead of time and know which code they need if they need Braille copies. Providing sign language and accurate ASL. We have a division for that. I'm not part of that, but we have a great team that's working on that and providing materials and supporting American Sign Language. It's so important for deaf and hard of hearing students having access to that, having instruction in it. Providing text transcripts, being able to use screen magnification and large print copies. So just making sure that we are providing what the student is going to need and how they're going to access it, because it's different for every student. A student might need a large print copy and then they access it through like a magnified TV, CCTV display, and that's just how they're used to accessing their daily work. You don't want to change and have to say, well, this student is now going to do it through a screen reader because it's digital and it has to be. The student needs to have prior experience with the type of format that the exam is provided in. Providing not only students with multiple options like to be presented with the exam, but also multiple options to respond. So students can respond using a brailler. They can respond using a keyboard, making sure that there's an assessment option that is keyboard operatable. Providing calculator or dictionary access. This supports multiple groups and is good to provide equally and open. It doesn't need to be hidden behind like access to on an IEP, like requiring some kind of like documentation. Just providing it to everyone is really great support. Being able to test using eye tracking technology, that does usually include like a specialized proctor, but it's still available. Or even using like switch devices to respond and select answers. Often students with disabilities are under-identified. That's one reason why these things need to just be available and open. It doesn't need to come behind like the student has a formal diagnosis, the student has that documented with the school and turn that in. Providing calculators, providing highlighters, providing, those kinds of access is good for all students. In an analysis of 11 Southern states, they found that white students were identified as having special needs more, even when controlling for income and academic achievement, and that often African Americans did not have the same kind of access to those disability diagnoses and being able to have an IEP. I provided a lot of references that you can check out that have more to say about assessment. One of the really great ones was the disability fact sheet, talking about all the different issues that they saw after conducting a lot of research. So if there's any questions, I'm happy to answer them. Thank you.
Hi, Karey Jo. Thanks
Hi,
for that
Adam.
session. That was
Yeah.
great. So yeah, but before we get started with the questions, I just want to go ahead and to give folks some more time to add more questions to the Q&A.
Yeah.
We're going to go ahead and open up the poll for your session. That it will, this is the last one. People should have already been exposed to this a little bit, but these polls really help us keep the lights on, and they are different than the survey that will go out whenever folks actually exit the webinar today. So two different things. It's a little confusing. Sorry about that. We'll try to get our our communications down a little better next year for that. But in the meantime, if anybody has any questions for Karey Jo, please feel free to add them to the Q&A. Looks like we do have one question in there for right now, and so I'll get started with that one, and that'll give folks a chance to get some more in there. So Grace asks, do you have any recommendations for professors who use images, scientific graphs, charts, etc., that magnify poorly due to low resolution? Is there any way to kind of retroactively correct images like these? Sometimes the professor can't find the original source document to rescan it at a higher resolution, etc.
That is really difficult. I don't give a lot of advice to professors because we are the publisher side, so we would just create a better image or get access to an original, because those really are the only options. You've got to have that high res, and you can't really like fix an image if it's low quality. It's just low quality. I would find a different source, unfortunately, which is hard. I know we've talked about earlier the issues caused by teachers just not wanting to update their curriculum, but like unfortunately things technology wise are changing so fast, it really has to be done.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, we always recommend, if you got to go try to find that source document, and if it's not available, then yeah, either choose a different image altogether or possibly try to recreate it somehow.
Yeah. I think we've all seen those worksheets that have been Xeroxed 82 times, and you're supposed to analyze specific data and you're like, I can't even see this graph. Like, right. What are we doing here?
Yeah. I've used the same document for 40 years. What's the problem, right?
Yeah, the color contrast really, it extends not only to the computer screen, but also the actual paper copies. Like having good contrast on your paper copies is really important.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, no, and that's actually a good kind of point that doesn't get brought up a lot is that most of the time when we're talking about digital accessibility stuff, it's or accessibility, it's only about digital, and really a lot of those things like color contrast and font size and that kind of stuff does also translate to print.
And how if it's high quality, you can magnify it, and like people with low vision can get access to that image. But if it's low quality, whether it's digital or a print, you're just not going to be able to enlarge it and see any kind of detail.
Yeah. At some point, you're just putting lipstick on a pig, right? So. Okay. Next, we have a question from Glenn. Do you work with the Oklahoma Library for the Blind and Physically Handicapped?
I don't anymore. When I was a teacher of the blind and visually impaired, I spent a ton of time up there, and I love that building and all of those people and the access I was able to get to Braille materials. It was really great for my students. We always had new exciting things. We got iPads to learn voiceover. Just the access that they provide, I cannot talk about enough. Pepper Watson is one of the directors up there, and she's just great. So if you have a specific question about the library for the blind, I can maybe tell you something, but like I don't work with them closely anymore since I don't have students anymore.
All right. Well, that's the last question in the Q&A. Let me, oh, actually, we just had one come in. So Tony asks, let's see, my students with disabilities have a great deal of trouble with constructive response sections on standardized tests. Many functions that would be accessible in normal word processing programs are not accessible there, such as spell check, cut, paste, text to speech, etc.
I can tell you this week I worked on an editor that is accessible to all those things. So if it's not available now, it should be soon. I can't speak to who you're using, but they should be developing that and supporting that if they don't already.
That's great.
Yeah, it's really important to kind of, support access to those for like keyboard access. As far as like supporting the common shortcuts that we're used to having access to in like Word. So yeah.
Great. Looks like we have a follow-up comment from Glenn about the last question about the working with the Library for the Blind.
Mm-hmm.
And they say that their office is there. So
It's a great place to be.
okay. Well, any other questions for Carey Jo? Give everybody a second to put those in. Well, don't see any coming in immediately, but I'll just comment that yeah, it's good to know that you used to be a VI teacher. That's actually what my wife does. So she's the VI teacher for Middle public schools, and so I'll have to see about getting her hooked up with you.
Yeah, that's awesome.
We'll take some time to let other people put questions in, but I actually have one for you, Carey Jo.
Okay.
You feel like your experience as a teacher of the visually impaired has impacted your, work at Pearson? Like, what do you feel like has been good or bad or whatever, taking that experience in?
It's been really gratifying to me because as a teacher of the visually impaired and blind, I would get told, oh, we were using this new software, go use this with your students, they have to do this, and then we would go and get on it and we could not use it. And I would have to go back and try to explain this to them that it doesn't work with a screen reader, that it's not keyboard operable. And so now working on the other side and being able to make recommendations for redesigns and for alternative testing formats, it's really it's a good feeling, and it's not, I'm not a teacher anymore, so I can't provide like user feedback like that. But recently we had I don't know, I think probably 12 teachers that we did a focus group with, and being able to kind of like share and explain what kind of things they're requesting for their students and what kind of things they need, and like the different kinds of consistency across different curriculums and supports that I know that they're using with their students, and being able to provide access to those to the developers so that they know how to best reach all of these students. It's really really gratifying. I really enjoy it.
Good. I've heard several cases of that just in my experience in the field, people going from a position where they're constantly coming up against barriers, and then they go to work for a company that is trying to reduce those barriers through whatever product it is that they're building. So I'm sure that is gratifying. That's very, very cool that you're able to see both sides of it too. I think that's a helpful perspective. So anybody else have any more last minute questions for Carey? Joe?
Yeah, we've got one here from Brent, and he asks, a decade ago, it was very difficult to get accessibility materials from publishers, even large ones. Can you speak about what changed the trajectory of a big publisher like Pearson?
So I've worked for Pearson for a year now. I work with a lot of people that have worked with them for like 20 years. And I can tell you that, it's only been in the last 8 years that they've even had an accessibility team. We went from about, I think, 2 employees working on accessibility full time about 8 years ago to recently we had over 25, with, teams all over, in all of our divisions. There's definitely been in the last 10 years a big swing, I would say, from, I don't want to say zero knowledge, but like zero budget, zero divisions and like specific positions focused on this to now, they all they all know who we are, and they know we sit in on meetings to design things and help them make sure that they're keeping accessibility first of mind. They also, every product has to be submitted to our testers to get feedback, and critical issues have to be resolved before they can go live. So I think going from that level of knowledge to 10 years ago where there wasn't really even an understanding of it is a big jump. Obviously we have farther to go and we can do better. I think one of the big issues that we're really trying to improve on is getting at the base design stages and not coming in at the end and trying to fix things that are kind of widespread, like menus that are not keyboard operable or designed to be accessible.
That's good. Got another question here from Gina. They say, I asked this earlier, but with the college entrance exams, why aren't more schools required to keep up-to-date JAWS programs since they can't use their own computers?
So in my experience, we just installed a new JAWS every year. I haven't had experience with not having access to current JAWS. Is that a common issue? I don't know.
Yeah,
I'm sorry.
Yeah, I'm not really sure either.
Yeah.
As far as like whether that's a widespread issue or not, but that's a good
We
point.
always had a woman that she was our Braille specialist, and she would go around to all the schools that every August update to the new JAWS of the year. So we usually had ongoing contracts through the school district. So I would guess if you're not getting that, you would start with either, if you have an AT specialist, Braille specialist like that does that kind of work for throughout your district. And if not, you need to talk to your district special education office and let them know that this needs to be regularly updated, because JAWS is always pushing updates, not just the yearly ones.
Yeah, no, that's good. Brent has a follow-up question. He asks, is Pearson seeing any returns via adoption numbers in the largest U.S. textbook markets? And does it seem like pushing the scales more toward accessible content is having a positive impact?
I think it's had a really big and positive impact. And I would say that more and more we're seeing our clients are having vendor requirements that we have to show, and before we can even return on like a proposal to work with someone, we have to really share with them what our accessibility is, what our what our level is now, what kind of issues we're having with our products now, and our roadmap for fixing those. So yeah, I hope that answered that question.
It looks like Glenn asks, do you know about Dragon Naturally Speaking? Is it also remaining current? Kind of like JAWS is, having regular updates, I imagine.
I work with some great people that work with Dragon, and I don't know that much about it. My specialty is really JAWS and NVDA and Braille displays. So I know we do support using people using Dragon. I do think that's one of our more like special proctored exam situations, just depending on the person's abilities with it. So we support use of Dragon naturally, but I don't have a lot of expertise in it.
Let's see. I have kind of a situation that we got asked this question at Able Tech about digital textbooks, and I just want to pick your brain a little bit, see if if you have any suggestions. So this person has a situation where they have a exam that's open book, and the student needs to be able to use the digital textbook, you know, to be able to change contrast, text size, etc. But the instructor is pushing back that the PDF is searchable. And for whatever reason, that's an issue for the instructor. And you know, we were looking for, like, our knee-jerk reaction was to just kind of push back on that instructor and ask them, you know, why is that an issue? But you know, we were just wondering, trying to get,
especially if it's a blind student, that's equivalent to providing them the ability to scan a text. I mean, I don't see
right,
any issue with providing that ability to search a PDF.
okay, yeah, and so
I would strongly push against that. And a professor is not there to make those kind of decisions as far as access for students with special needs. They're there to listen to the experts that they work with that specialize in that. So I hope they keep that in mind.
yeah, that's a very good point. And you know, we hope to be able to to work with that instructor to kind of get this situation figured out. So
Yeah,
that's great.
I see a lot of times, you know, instructors pushing back on basic disability inclusion efforts because they feel like it invalidates their test, but it really doesn't. It's just basic access that everyone deserves, and that you know, having something read to you doesn't mean that you don't understand it. So yeah,
Right, yeah, like my first thought was, you know, it's like, if, because it seemed like the issue was that they would be able to search it maybe too quickly or quicker than other students, and you know, my suggestion then would just be, well, then just provide the digital document to everybody, and then everybody can search it the same, right?
that is a great solution.
So but
that is the solution. That is a great solution to advocate, because yeah, make it faster for everyone if it's open book. And like, I mean, why wouldn't it be digital book? What does it matter? That's how most of us access information now.
exactly. So, okay, well, that seems to be all the questions that I can see.